Okay, we are back from lunch. Hope everybody had a chance to refuel, rehydrate, maybe get up, stretch the legs a little bit. But we are going to jump right into the second half of the summit. I see that Andreas is logged in, ready to go. Okay, and he is going to be giving us a presentation on Velociraptor as a learning tool. Give you a quick summary on Andreas. If I can find it. So Andreas has over 2 decades of experience across red and blue teams. He delivered dozens of security consultancy projects across diverse industry verticals. In recent years, he sharpened his threat hunting, incident response, and digital forensic skill sets and worked many high-profile IR cases. He currently heads up the SOC at an oil and gas company. So ladies and gentlemen, let me hand it off to Andreas Flamino.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm just gonna share my screen. Right. So welcome everyone to my talk, Velociraptor as a learning tool, or how to tame the beast to dig deeper. We already covered the high-level bio, so I will skip over this. The idea of this talk really stems from my personal journey with Velociraptor, and my aim is to inspire and bridge the gap between people who regularly use the tool for DFIR and those who do not and want to get better. Now, what I experienced is that it's easier to become 10 times as effective than 2 times as effective in my job after I started using Velociraptor. Now, this was mainly a factor of becoming more self-starting and more resourceful, as opposed to reactive and being dependent on alerts and findings from other types of tooling. Now, if you don't use Velociraptor regularly and you are a DFIR specialist, I'm confident that you will find this to be true as well if you take the leap and dig in. Now, for those who do use Velociraptor on a regular basis, I hope this talk will inspire you to get other people to use it more and perhaps become more effective as a team. I've organized this talk by describing a senior and associate avatar as guideposts, and we'll share insights from a senior perspective and opportunities for an associate. So let's start with the senior. Now, for me, in planning this talk, a senior associate, I'm thinking of someone with maybe 5 to 10 years of experience. Maybe they're an IR consultant, maybe L2 or L3 SOC analyst. They could be senior security analyst or digital forensics consultant. If this sounds like you, or if this is something you do, the following situations might sound familiar. Now, in the context of IRs, you might come across situations where the affected systems don't have all the corporate security controls deployed. Or maybe you find that there aren't any custom rules in the EDR, or maybe you find that there are way too few logs being ingested by the SIEM. Or maybe you spend out a lot of time rolling commercial tooling out during an IR, and during this process you might have to deal with sales, procurement, change requests, and a lot of other time-consuming activities before you can even get started with your investigation. So the summary here is that in an IR, typically you're dealing with limited information at the beginning of your engagement. Now, when you're hunting, some challenges are that common challenges could be that you're trying to piece together why the SIEM and EDR aren't configured properly. Maybe you have concerns about not having the right level of visibility, or maybe you're frustrated about the limitations the EDRs have when it comes to allowing you to perform a bit more creative pivots. And maybe you often run into situations where you either accept a risk or just get a system re-imaged and be done with it. Now, in doing digital forensics on one image or one system at a time, and you're analyzing forensic images, that can often take dozens of hours. And if you're using tooling to, extract a lot of artifacts in an automated fashion, again, that can take a lot of time. Now, especially in situations where forensic soundness is not a hard requirement, that can be needlessly time-consuming. Now, when I think of the associate avatar, I'm thinking of someone with, maybe little to 5 years of experience, maybe an L1 or L2 SOC analyst. Maybe this person is a fresh graduate, or perhaps a digital forensics consultant with not that much lower level OS forensic knowledge yet. If you are an L1 or L2 SOC analyst, in your day-to-day work, you might have so many alerts that you really have limited opportunity to grow technically beyond the SIEM and the tools that feed into it. Your work as a result might be highly transactional, going from one alert to the other. And perhaps you would like to get a better understanding of the finer details of what's happening on an endpoint. Or maybe you're a digital forensic specialist with, not so much lower level OS knowledge, and you really rely on the tooling to present you with findings. Now, if this sounds like you, these challenges, might sound familiar. You really do not have enough time to properly investigate security incidents, but you also do not have the visibility due to the limitations of the EDRs and other tools that feed into the incidents. And when there's an alert or incident that looks like a true positive, you might have to hand it off to higher levels of analysts in the SOCs or technical support to follow up. And again, they might just scan the system, maybe re-image it, or maybe send it to more experienced people to perform forensic analysis. Now, in both these types of avatars and these types of roles, you might feel somewhat constrained in getting results fast. And you may have accepted the idea that this is just the speed at which things work. Now, if you fall in either of these two avatars or kind of in between, I think that the rest of the presentation, that you will enjoy the rest of the presentation, because I'll share some anecdotes about the transformations that me and some of my associates went through. Now, I'll use this pyramid to visualize my idea about the relation between forensics, threat hunting, and incident response. I'll start from the top because personally I find incident response most exciting. To me, incident response is essentially threat hunting after an incident has formally been declared. And some characteristics of an IR are that you probably have some facts, or at least a very strong suspicion about what happened, some type of breach. What stopped happening, maybe a service disruption, what went missing in the case of data exfiltration, or maybe things that got modified in the case of ransomware. Now, of course, these are not exhaustive examples, but you get the idea. You have some facts, and as a result of having some starting points, you should be able to form several strong hypotheses about what happened and start piecing together the details and build your timeline. Now, additionally, IR can be tense, and some people, around you, maybe not you, of course, but they might be very nervous, and things can get a bit, tense and chaotic sometimes. Now, when you're doing incident response, in addition, it's very expensive in one or more ways. So the longer you take to conclude your response to the point that services are being restored, the higher the cost. So be it either in the time that you're billing to the client, or the cost of the service disruption, or a combination of those. Now let's look at some of the characteristics of threat hunting. To me, the main differentiator between IR and threat hunting in this context is that threat hunting is proactive, whereas IR is reactive. As a result, you may have little urgency to do your hunting because nothing bad happened yet, or at least not that you're aware of it yet. And most of the time, you will not find anything malicious. And so on the downside, this can be a little bit boring, especially if you're hunting in a very well-managed environment. But on the upside, you're building a very solid understanding of what's normal in an environment. So to me, the summary is that threat hunting is the act of proactively looking for bad things through means of performing forensic analysis on more than one host at a time. This brings me to forensics. I think that forensics is really the foundation for any host-based analysis. You need to understand what artifacts you're looking for, and some artifacts that are essential, or some areas that are essential to grasp to some level in detail. Include things like different types of execution, authentication, programs that have run in the past, present, and will run in the future, services, the registry, logging, file management, storage devices, and so many more areas. And it's just to say that OS Forensic alone covers a vast body of knowledge that can take years to learn and many more years to master. Now, let's go back to the main idea. So to me, working it back up to the top, to me, forensic analysis is really the best foundation to start hunting. And being an experienced threat hunter is really essential for effective IR. And to rapidly increase your competence in all areas, Velociraptor can help you a lot. So let's dig in and look at some examples of some key learnings that I had in my personal journey. So the first thing that Velociraptor offered me is that it helped me to become even more self-starting in my job. And unless you give it a task, to collect information from your endpoints, it will do absolutely nothing for you. There are no graphs, no alert, no warnings. There's no enrichment with external data sources, nothing. There's just a powerful framework that is waiting for you to do something. Now, this reminds me of the time, sometime in the late 90s, when I installed Linux for the first time. And I thought that the installation had failed because I ended up with some white letters on a black screen. And back then, a friend of mine recommended a book called Unix Shell Scripting, and I started learning about the commands built into the shell, each of them doing one thing and doing the thing really well. After understanding how some of the basic commands work and how to combine them, I quickly became very resourceful and self-starting. I started writing little scripts, and that later became more complex scripts, and it helped me save a lot of time as a systems administrator. Now, with Velociraptor, I experienced a very similar type of journey when hunting and working IRs. And I remember when someone told me about Velociraptor and told me that a friend of his did, compromise assessments in very large financial institutions with nothing else but Velociraptor. I looked at it and I think, if you learn all these artifacts really well, they probably do one thing really well. And if you know how to combine them together, you're going to get very efficient and creative. So these are some of the artifacts that I started with. So I started, learning about how to collect users, programs, different types of evidence of executions, search through the file system, searching for files, pulling the MFT, searching through event logs, and searching for very specific event logs. And different packs that collect a lot of information at the same time, for example, about persistence, lateral movement, and execution. While learning how all these artifacts work individually, I really deepened my understanding about how things are organized on the Windows operating system, and I experienced a rapid growth. I had the opportunity to hunt across a very large number of systems over a long period and built a very solid baseline about what is happening in the environment, because I interacted with unaltered and uninterpreted data that came directly from the endpoint. I then continued to more complex artifacts and started looking at the source code to understand how they work. I then noticed that complex artifacts all rely on a set of core artifacts and functionality to combine, refine, and answer more complex questions. Now, as my competence with the basic artifacts increased, I experienced a growth in confidence. And that's really when the competence and confidence loop started. And I noticed a step up in this loop with each investigation. Now, the confidence-competence loop is a concept from modern psychology where you have the confidence to try things, observe the outcome, and then learn from it, which in turn then builds your competence, increasing your knowledge, your ability, and your skill set with each cycle that you go through. Now, the next thing that it offered me is that I became much more resourceful. Specifically in the context of DFIR. So after a while, I started asking more complex questions by using more advanced artifacts. And at times I would notice that some artifacts would return nearly what I needed, but there was something missing. And at those times, I remembered that another artifact performs an operation that I missed in the first one. So that's the time when I started creating modifications in existing artifacts to end up with new or modified artifacts to arrive at the answer that I was looking for before I made the changes. Now, I also experienced that when I explore artifacts that I haven't used before, I would learn new things, get new hunting ideas, and learn about forensic artifacts I'd never explored in depth before. Now, some examples, some easy examples are adding hashing functionality to particular artifacts, or maybe I would be using a particular artifact that pulls some data from the registry, but maybe it wouldn't return any data that I expected. And then I would do some research and find out that either a particular security feature or a convenience feature was turned off, or maybe that it was different on the version of Windows that I was using. So that really, helped me deepen my experience and knowledge further. Additional things I would do or have done are implementing enrichment using threat intel sources, for example, from VirusTotal or our private MISP instance. Now, when I got comfortable with this, my ability to get results became mainly limited by my time, depth of understanding, and creativity. And next, if I really ever get stuck or ever really get stuck, I would go to the Discord channel, and I would then first use the search function to see if my question has been asked before. And if it hasn't, I would ask my question and usually get my question answered within minutes. The thing I really like about the community is that it brings practitioners together from many different backgrounds and experience levels, and even some very esoteric questions can be answered, and often, in a very short amount of time. As a result, my knowledge compounded quickly, and this is, an experience that's very pleasant and in stark contrast with some other host-based tooling support channels. I've had several experiences where I would ask a very detailed question that was not covered in the documentation, and maybe I would get a response after a few days telling me that I'd have to engage professional services, or maybe be pointed to the documentation that I already read and that didn't cover the answer. The next thing that I really like about working with Velociraptor is that it helps me really understand boundaries of other host-based tools. So after going through this loop of building confidence and expanding my understanding, I really started to pick up speed and assembled a lot of tools in my tool belt. Now, my range of questions to ask the OS expanded rapidly. And when faced with commercial toolings, I noticed that all of them have a very clear and firm boundaries in terms of functionality compared to Velociraptor. As an example, there aren't many host-based security controls that I know of that allow me to do things like, request the MFT for one or more hosts for a specific time window after seeing some suspicious-looking executions in the user assist hive, or pull back all service or scheduled task definitions from all hosts and quickly establish how common they are, or hunt for files matching specific regular expressions in specific folders and then pulling back the hashes, or do things like hunt for IOCs across specific Windows event logs, or maybe different application logs, or in some situations, even every single file on the system using Yara. Or do things like pull back a list of all the Office documents that had macros enabled by the end user. So after I worked with Velociraptor extensively for a period, I started to really appreciate how much power and flexibility you have to ask very big questions in a very broad sense and get very quick responses. I also started to appreciate how most commercial vendors do a great job at doing what they think is important. But when you want to create a solid baseline or do a deep investigation, there are questions that are interesting and perhaps crucial during your hunt or response that are not covered by your EDR, XDR, next-gen AV, etc. So once I understood these boundaries well, I started to deeply understand how well Velociraptor and good EDRs can play together. Specifically, Velociraptor, can do more of the heavy lifting, and you can ask very specific questions in a short amount of time. And then have EDRs take care of the real-time monitoring and the enrichment on the other hand. And this is also my preferred way of working during IRs. So in several IRs I worked on, there was limited or no EDR coverage at the start of the engagement. And I would very quickly get a solid overview of what the adversary did using Velociraptor, at the beginning of the engagement. And then I used those findings, that information to start building my timeline. Now, while the picture of what happened during the intrusion shaped up, the EDR would, typically a lot slower be rolled out, and we would have real-time alert monitoring and events. After services and internet connectivity were restored, the EDR would then give us the confidence that we had not missed anything and that the attacker wasn't coming back, without having to run the same types of Velociraptor collectors repeatedly. The next thing I really love about Velociraptor is that it allows me to stand on the shoulders of great researchers and developers. So once I developed a solid handle on the go-to artifacts that come with Velociraptor stable release, I arrived at a point where I would feel exhausted in my learning phase and plateaued a bit in my development. So that's really when going to the artifact exchange gave me many new ideas. And as I dove into newer and more niche artifacts, I found that many do things that I know little about. And for example, some artifacts leveraging third-party tools are some examples, like, interpreting the output of the Hollows Hunter or Malfind and the surprising results that it gave me when running it across hundreds of systems. Now, every time when this happens, there is an opportunity to go into a new rabbit hole where an expansion of knowledge is waiting to unfold. And there have also been several situations where I run out of ideas to hunt for during an IR, but I was absolutely convinced that there was more to find. And then if I'd go to the artifact exchange, I would come across specific artifacts that hadn't been relevant until that situation, maybe because they provided some context about specific attacks, or analyzed specific forensic artifacts or specific applications or context about vulnerabilities. And all of these opportunities, or in all these cases, I had the opportunity to benefit from the knowledge, research, and creativity of other practitioners who know a lot more about those areas than I do. Log4j was, for one excellent example of just after how the vulnerability was given a CVE and became widely known and exploited. It very quickly had an artifact released on the Artifact Exchange that helped you find vulnerable libraries. And if you are responsible for protecting an environment throughout that time, it became widely known. You might remember how it took vendors days, and in some cases over a week, to identify which versions of which exact software were vulnerable. Yet the initial artifact that was released and the variations that followed it were very quickly able to help me identify which of our software was vulnerable, so we could take preventative action without having to wait for vendors. So this comes to the conclusion of the key learnings for me as a bit more senior. I really, I want to say that the journey of executing my first single hunts to getting to a level where I can confidently pick between 10 and 20 different artifacts during a complex incident response engagement has been a very enlightening one. And I really enjoy the rapid increase in the ability of ability of finding actionable facts that it offered me. And every client where I delivered IR projects has acknowledged that we can the value that we can bring with it. And over time, I feel that rapid response becomes really easy. And there've been many engagements where I come on site, and then within the first day, there are so many different findings that I could uncover with Velociraptor. And yet, the more I learn and the more I get done with Velociraptor, the more I realize I have so many more areas that I can dive much deeper to. And that to me is like truly exciting. So moving on to the key opportunities for the associate. So as an associate, some or maybe many of the previous examples might still go over your head. However, the hierarchy of host-based investigations is still a useful concept. When you're starting out, at the very beginning, I think the best place to start is the foundation. So focusing on digital forensics first and threat hunting second. Now, some good starting points could be study material you have, or maybe a course or some books that you order online. And I think you should, just like the senior, start by learning the core artifacts. And when you do, it's extremely useful to learn what each returned row means. And if you can't figure it out immediately, Google it and you will find it. Now, here are some of the commonly needed artifacts that you should be able to find fairly quickly. So you should be able how to interact with the Windows registry. You should be able to query AD and local user objects on your system. You should be able to understand the MFT format, be able to search for all sorts of files on your system in using many different types of search queries, know how the recycle bin works, how to check for installed programs and programs that ran in the past, look at service definitions, scheduled tasks, and other potential persistence mechanisms. and also learn about how network sockets are being used by programs. Now, it's my experience that if you write down what you learn from the perspective to explain it to others later, you will remember things better. And after learning how each of the core artifacts work, you can explore how to logically follow one with another. You can also just search through the available artifacts in Velociraptor, read their description, and just see what comes back. Now, chances are when you go through this journey, you will find some artifacts that you like a lot and pique your curiosity more than others. And I highly encourage you to follow your curiosity and develop your unique ability so you become really good at it. Now, in larger IR teams, for example, you'll typically find that everybody has their own key strength that nobody else in the team has quite at that same level. And this is really your opportunity to find what excites you and develop yourself in an area that piques your interest. Now, your learning process should be fluid, ever diving deeper, or maybe hunting in a broader scope while developing your abilities of being self-starting and resourceful. Now, those qualities of being self-starting and resourceful are some of the most valuable skills you can develop. Not just in your cybersecurity work, but also in life in general. Now, being self-starting can mean that you can develop your own hunting idea or your own gut feeling about what might be a key artifact to pull or to request from the endpoint. Being resourceful means that if you get stuck, you can by yourself think of ways to get unstuck. You can find resources that can help you further. And most of the time, that will mean that you can find the answer yourself. And sometimes it means that you ask someone who is already an expert in a certain area for pointers. Now, note the key word here, pointers. I think you can learn a lot more if you try to avoid asking for the entire answer. Not only because you learn less if you ask someone for the entire answer, but also because you might figure out better answers if you do the work yourself. Now, when you become more self-starting and resourceful, your mindset will truly change, and this will truly set you apart from people who know a handful of defensive security tools well, but only know how to react to alerts that are triggered by the tools that they use. So as you go through this process, you're really building a solid foundation to expand on. And this is really an excellent starting point to continue to threat hunting. Now, if you're lucky and you might work in a team where they already use Velociraptor. If not, perhaps it would be a good time to suggest your team members to start using it. Now, this will be a lot easier if you can already demonstrate to your team members what you have learned by yourself and how you can get a lot of actionable data, actionable artifacts from endpoints in a short amount of time. Now, assuming you can use Velociraptor in your team, this is your opportunity. You can use this opportunity to become a better security analyst and threat hunter. So if you are running Velociraptor in your environment, you could start with some of the following tasks, like qualifying findings from other tools such as EDR alerts or SIEM dashboards. And the talk about SOC integration that we saw this morning was a really great example of that. Or you could look at service definitions for newly created services, programs or scripts that are executed through new and modified scheduled tasks, and encouraging yourself, or if you're working with people in your team, or if you're learning yourself, look up what each new or modified service is used for, or at the very least, understand what kind of vendor or context it belongs to. Or you could do things like evaluate PowerShell and command.exe logs and understand what the commands do, and then look up the commandlets that are unfamiliar to really build out a mental map of what types of scripts are running in the environment and what type of tasks are being performed by administrators. Now, the increasing, another thing you can do is just increase the contextual awareness of an alert by being able to quickly pivot and answer questions directly on the endpoint or with information coming directly from the endpoint. I've worked with different EDRs, and in after working with Velociraptor, I kind of feel a little bit handicapped if I'm only looking at the EDR, because there's so many features or so many things I can do with Velociraptor that EDR simply do not do. And that's sometimes a bit difficult. Other things you could do are perform focused hunts for TTPs that you have shortlisted in your threat intelligence or your threat intel driven hunting strategy, and provide summaries on findings that stood out or new things that were learned. In the beginning, if you are just starting out with Velociraptor, I would start refining the results that come back in your notebook in 3 phases. So in the first phase, I think it's really useful to pull back data into Excel using the CSV export function, and then just use Excel to start color coding, filtering, sorting, grouping, and doing some searches across columns, using regular expressions or using searches on specific columns. Now, once you're familiar with that approach, and you do it on a regular basis, you will come across artifacts or specific hunts that might pull back really large files. So maybe you're dealing with tens of thousands or just thousands of rows, and that can become a bit hard to manage. So I think that's really the ideal time to start learning some basic VQL statements to sort and count and refine your result set and reduce it, to a smaller result set to get the answers that you're looking for quicker. Then once you've done that, I think in the third phase, you could expand your VQL knowledge and do a lot more creative filtering. In that phase, you might start using a lot of regular expressions and substatements in your queries. And here's a good pointer. Your ability to unleash the power of Velociraptor really increases dramatically when you start to add ever more creative VQL statements in your notebooks. So once you reach this level, you should be confident enough that you can start finding things that warrant further investigation and start assisting with IRs. So one way to get to that point could be to just raise your hand if if the team you work in is responsible for handling IRs, and just say that you want to contribute and help out. If your team does not do any IRs, maybe you can do IR challenges where you can either bring your own tools or you can download the VM and do it on your own in your own environment and do your hunting and response there. Now, this is really the phase where you should develop your fluidity and your creativity in quickly assessing a situation and understand which collections quickly or logically follow one another, right? And it's really the time to build your muscle of very quickly building a situational awareness. Now, once you reach this point, you're definitely on an accelerated path to becoming a senior. So wrapping up, I think that the way an associate can benefit from Velociraptor is very similar to that as a senior. I think the main difference are the starting points, the size of the available body of knowledge, and the understanding to draw from, and the breadth of the contextual awareness that we start with. It's my belief that a curious associate can experience a rapid expansion of growth and exposure if they start by themselves or are given the correct pointers. And after this knowledge gap is closed a little bit, I think the main thing standing between the associate and the senior is really the number of repetitions. Now, the key features that Velociraptor offers to practitioners on any level are development of a very strong proactive mindset, unparalleled flexibility, and speed of execution, and finding actionable intelligence from your endpoints. So this is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I can answer them.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Like you said, if anybody has any questions, please throw them into the Q&A. I don't think there are any in there for you right now, but we'll keep an eye on it. But yeah, thanks very much, Andreas.
Thank you too.
You got it. All right, so we're moving right along. That puts us right on schedule for our next presentation, which is by someone that I'm sure everyone on this call, or not everyone, but a lot of people on this call are probably very familiar with.